Hey guys, this is Captain Kabob here, the dub guy. Uh, I'm doing a bit of a different video here than even what you've probably used to on the channel as a whole. So recently, Death Battle in one of their casts, one of their special events, deconfirmed what is actually my dream matchup, my favorite matchup, Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson. If you don't know, Death Battle is a show where you take two different characters from media, it can be from TV shows, or movies, games, or comics is used a lot, or anime and stuff, and pit them against each other to see who would win in a battle to the death. They compare stats, they go over each character in detail, and then they usually draw an animation for said battle. Death Battle is a show that I have a lot of passion for. I've watched it since I think around season 3. Season 3 or the end of season 2. It's sometime in there. Regardless, I'm a long-time viewer of the show, and it's just something I've wanted to talk about for a while now with people. So that's why I'm doing this video. There hasn't been, any particular interest in this topic, but even on the server, but I figured I'd make this video both to give us something to do to post in between working on the next dub. That is still happening, it's just taking forever, what with college and everything.
And also by putting something out into the black void, I hope to locate somebody who shares this interest as much as I.
Anyway, this video is going to be a lot more casual than you're probably used to. This is just mostly me just going off the top of my head, talking casually. I have some talking points here that I'm going to try and hit, but for the most part it's going to be pretty unscripted. Also, this was begun recording at like 11:30 at night after a long day of activities, and it is now 1:11 a.m. So there's also that, so I'm probably could be very tired and very nonsensical in what I'm saying. Also, I do want to preface this by saying that while this is my dream matchup, and I'm understandably going to have a lot of bias towards in this video, and also probably going to end up gushing a lot about why I like this matchup so much in this video is ultimately going to be about why I think this matchup needs to happen, objectively speaking. So it's not this is not just me saying this is a matchup I really, really want and upset that it got deconfirmed. Joker vs. Kirito is my second favorite matchup of all time, and if that got deconfirmed, I would not nearly be as upset about it. I would perfectly understand that is not a matchup that needs to happen. Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter is a matchup that needs to happen. If Death Battle does not do this matchup, they are making a huge mistake. So, getting into this Death Battle on its Death Battle cast, basically deconfirmed Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson as a future matchup. Because of the reason saying that it is a god stomp in favor of Percy. Basically, they won't do it because Percy god stomps Harry. Now, like many terms in versus debating, the term god stomp doesn't necessarily have a singular meaning. But as I see it, a god stomp is when one character outclasses their opponent so much that there's just no conceivable way that their opponent can win. It's as if we were to fight a god. There's no way we're winning that fight. That is what a god stomp is. Now, the first big reason why this is a really bad way of deconfirming this is that Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson is not a god stomp. It's not even a regular stomp. As somebody whose matchup this is their favorite, this is my dream matchup, I have debated this matchup a lot. And while I do agree that Percy generally wins, there is a ton of ways that Harry can still win this matchup. It is a very close matchup. Yes, it is true that Percy completely outclasses Harry in every regard in terms of stats. But the thing about versus debating is that you can't just rely on stats. Yes, stats are a very big factor, and more often than not, the person with the much bigger stats will be able to pull out a victory. But the thing is that abilities are also play a very big role, and Harry's abilities, or hacks as we call them, in the form of magic, is just really, really powerful. Harry Potter magic is very free, and it's very versatile in what it allows the wizards to do. Basically, there is many ways that Harry could just as easily finish off Percy. For instance, he could paralyze Percy with a Mobulus and then go ahead and stab him with the Sword of Gryffindor. Or he could use Confundus on Percy and somehow get Percy to take himself out. He could just straight up turn Percy to stone with Duro? Duro? I'm reading it here. Let's say Duro. He could turn him to stone. Or he could just straight up kill Percy with Avada Kedavra. Yeah, it would be out of character for Harry to do this, but especially in a setting like Death Battle, where they have all morals off, it's something that he could do. Heck, I'm seeing here, maybe I don't really know Harry as well as Percy, but I've heard that there's another spell called Impervious, which repels water from a surface. Maybe Harry could use Impervious on himself and completely make himself immune to Percy's water attacks. Who knows? See, there's tons of ways that Harry could make this difficult or even win against Percy. It's just that, in my opinion, Percy has enough advantages in his power and speed and his just general durability to be able to pull a win off over Harry more times than Harry can pull a win off over Percy. But Ada is far from a god stomp or even a stomp. And the other big argument is, god stomps have never been a problem for Death Battle. They say that they won't do it because of a god stomp, but they did Flash versus Quicksilver. They did Goku versus Superman. And if you need a more recent, episode, because those two are also pretty old episodes, they very recently did Lucy versus Carnage, which I would argue is very much a god stomp. There is nothing that Carnage could do in order to beat Lucy. But Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter? Nah, that's too much of a god stomp. And so, okay. So that's why them deconfirming Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson doesn't make any sense. But I still haven't said why it's a bad move. Like, why should it matter that this got deconfirmed? Well, the big reason, and the one that I personally am the most concerned about, is that by deconfirming Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter, you are taking away one of literature's greatest chances of representation in Death Battle. Literature as a whole has been horribly underrepresented in Death Battle. Having no characters from literature in Death Battle since Harry Potter himself, all the way back in Season 1. And we'll get into that a bit later when I discuss Harry's matchup, but there really isn't a whole lot of other matches that are super popular that consist of this representation for literature. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head is Gandalf versus Dumbledore, which is a very fine match. It's actually, ironically, more of a stomp than Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson, but it's still a very fine match and that I would love to see. But I'd argue that Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson is just as much of a popular match as Gandalf versus Dumbledore, and I feel like it's more important that Harry Potter versus Percy Jackson happen than Gandalf versus Dumbledore, and that is not entirely, but it's mostly due to potential matchups. Basically, to sum it up real quick, Percy Jackson and Harry Potter don't really have good matchups, in my opinion, besides each other. Whereas both Gandalf and Dumbledore have those matchups. For instance, off the top of my head, one of my favorite matchups is Gandalf versus Yoda. It's a legacy matchup that I think would be really interesting to watch, and I think the debate of the Force versus Middle-earth magic would be really interesting to hear. Also, for Dumbledore, I've seen a few opponents knocked around. One is Qui-Gon from Star Wars, of course. And the other one, though, that I really like is put him against Ida Hawthorne from the Owl House. They are two mentors that find their incredibly gifted protagonists in an unlikely situation and take them under their wing and encourage those protagonists to pursue their magical arts. In time, though, they reveal themselves to be some of the most powerful magic users of their respective series. On top of that, they also just have such conflicting personalities that I feel like it would make for a really fun fight. Plus, also having Ida on would also get us more animated show representation, so that's also very much a plus. Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, on the other hand, just don't have good matchups. Like, they don't have any good matchups other than each other. And this is just another general reason why Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter needs to happen, is that these two characters do not have any other matchups. Before I get into listing off the other popular matchups for these characters and why they don't work, I do want to first look at the connections of Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter so we can compare it to their other potential matchups. Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter is a battle between two teenage novel protagonists that have a common gift that is concealed from the rest of society, being a wizard and being a demigod. Their journeys throughout both their series are heavily tied to a prophecy, which they only learn the full meaning of and weight of towards the end of said series. With Percy learning that Luke is actually the one that is the sacrifice the prophecy speaks of, and Harry learning that the only way that he can actually destroy Voldemort is by dying himself. Also, both are extremely proficient amongst their respective groups, with Percy being one of the most powerful demigods of all, and also being the most skilled sword fighter in Camp Half-Blood, only rivaled by Luke. And Harry himself is extremely proficient in defense against the dark arts. Also, as a less major connection, both have black hair and green eyes. I always find that's an interesting little tidbit. Both have a main group of 3 characters that they all have their initial adventures with, and for both, set group has an insufferably smart girl and a comic relief best friend in them. Also, the big one is that this is a legacy match. The Percy Jackson of the Olympians and Harry Potter franchises have been rivals for years, and they also have famously similar storylines. Hey guys, this is Future Kabob here. Just inserting in a little footnote. I've talked it over with some friends on the server, and we have actually come up with some more connections for these two. Both fighters are originally unaware of the world that they actually belong to, and their parental figures have purposely kept this secret from them. Percy for his own safety, and Harry because the Dursleys are massive dickheads. Both have had people secretly keeping an eye on them from the world they belong to. Chiron for Percy, and Harry has that neighbor with the cat that none of us can remember the name of. Also, both, this ties into the whole thing about this being a legacy match and having very similar story structures, but both series have the same fantasy genre. It's a known world, an unknown, and in fact, the known in the end. Both characters feel a closer attachment to the unknown world than their known one, and express wishes to stay in the magical/godly world they feel at home in. Also, in the end, they both detach themselves from their known world in order to be in the new world where they feel like they can be themselves without fear. Thanks for the help, Viking. So now getting into the other matchups these two characters have, and starting with Percy Jackson because I know him better and know his matchups better. We have Percy Jackson versus Aqualad. I do not like this matchup. Sure, the connections are there, but oh man, I do not like the idea of Percy fighting a DC character. I hear that Percy actually might win, and as much as I would pop off if my boy Percy actually managed to end DC's winning streak, that's what they said for Wally versus Archie Sonic. And Ben 10 versus Green Lantern. Basically what I'm saying is that there's probably some sort of DC bullshit that gives Aqualad the win, and really, nobody wants to see that. I don't even particularly mind all the Marvel and DC representation we've been getting lately, or even all the Marvel versus DC we've been getting. I'm tired of seeing DC characters stomp our beloved franchises. Alright, next up we have Percy versus Katara from Avatar. I don't mind this one so much. In fact, if we were to have Percy Jackson in a death battle and it wasn't Percy versus Harry, this would be the one that I want. Basically, I really like Avatar, really like Katara, and I feel like there's enough thematic connections here for it to make it work. They're aquakinetic, sassy teenagers who, despite being some of the most powerful and skilled among their ranks, are just genuinely kind people. And it also actually has the potential for a really gruesome death, being that both of them have the capability to control human bodily fluids. With Katara having access to bloodbending, theoretically, and also Percy being very likely to be able to control human bodily fluids, because that one time he nearly choked a god to death in their own saliva. What's more, this fight I think could be really cool and fluid if it was done hand-drawn. Here's the thing though. I don't think that it would be hand-drawn. Because there are still better fights that are more suited to hand-drawn, and hand-drawn fights take a lot of time and budget. Basically, I think that if they didn't do Steven vs. Star hand-drawn, then they're definitely not going to do Percy vs. Katara hand-drawn. But then again, Genos vs. War Machine was hand-drawn, so I guess all bets are off. Going off the assumption that this won't be hand-drawn, I feel like Death Battle has shown from this history that they really aren't able to make full use of Avatar combat. At least to me, one of the things that makes combat in Avatar so engaging is because of how dynamic bending is. It's just as much of a dance as it is actual fighting. And from the two Avatar fights we've gotten in recent years, Aang versus Edward and Zuko versus Todoroki, they really haven't been able to capture this dynamic form of combat. All the Avatar fights have been criticized as being somewhat stiff, Zuko versus Todoroki especially. I feel like we do not need to see Avatar in Death Battle anytime soon, at least until they show that they are able to achieve this level of dynamic combat. Also, Percy vs. Korra can fuck right off, it's just worse Percy vs. Katara. Okay, next, Percy vs. Lapis. This one would also actually be a cool matchup. Probably the biggest appeal of this matchup would be the potential setting. It could take place high up in the air, with Lapis trying to lift the ocean into the sky, and Percy, being the son of the god of the ocean, is sent to investigate. The entire fight could take place with Percy and Lapis weaving between these pillars of flying water, and if Percy gets the final blow, it could just have a shot of Percy falling back down to Earth with the water beneath him, knowing that the ocean is safe and that he in turn will land safely. Unfortunately, this matchup is even worse than Katara vs. Percy, in that Lapis is even more powerful than Percy, having lifted an entire ocean, but she still has legitimately no way of actually killing Percy. Like, at least Katara could, control ice and whatnot. Lapis just controls water, and Percy is healed by water. So, and especially with Death Battle not seeming to know what a no limits fallacy is, this fight could very easily just end in a stalemate, which is never any fun. Not to mention that literally the only connection here is powerful water people. Lastly, Percy Jackson versus Invincible. Oh my god. And next, moving on to Harry's other potential matchups, we have nothing. No, seriously, nothing. I did some digging, and I literally find no matchups for Harry. Literally, the only matchup I could find that I liked was Harry versus Luce from the Owl House, and while I wouldn't be opposed to that, Luce already has a much better opponent in Anne from Amphibia. Now, you may be saying that Harry's already been in a death battle. And yeah, he has been in death battle. In a very forgettable episode back in season 1. Like, Luke versus Harry isn't a bad episode. In fact, it has a really cool moment, the death. But, man, it's just so forgettable. And the fact that Harry Potter, one of the most iconic media characters in all of media, is relegated to such a forgettable episode so early on. It's just such a waste. Harry needs some proper representation in Death Battle, and so does Percy. And this matchup, it's their only option. So come on, Death Battle, just give it to them. And as the first battle to really represent literature as a whole, I don't want them to just have this just be a throwaway episode. I want them to make this a full-blown season finale. Have the fight be a 3D fight. Sprites would not work for these two characters. Make it clear when the fight starts that these two characters don't want to fight each other. They have to and are very obviously not going for the kill. As the fight goes on, have them begin to realize the strength of the opponent they're up against and begin to change up their strategies accordingly. Maybe have Percy suddenly begin to use his water powers. After all, he does tend to avoid using his powers in the books. This can lead to Harry getting more and more overwhelmed as this fight continues, throwing out spell after spell until finally, in almost a panic, he throws out Sectum Sempra and strikes the first blow on Percy. I want there to be a moment where the battle just stops and they both watch the blood just fall onto the sand, and they suddenly realize that there is no going back. I want Percy to get powered up and healed by the water, then begin to press his advantage onto Harry. I want this power to be so overwhelming that Harry is backed into a corner. He stands there, overwhelmed, holding back the weight of the entire ocean with a single Protego curse and unable to think of what to do. Until finally, he summons his broom with Accio and turns it around. As Harry lands more and more hits on Percy, I want Percy to finally let go. I want him to summon a hurricane and knock Harry's broom out of the sky. If Percy wins, I want him to either overwhelm Harry with his sheer power, or perhaps finally give in to his dark side and choke Harry in his own saliva, before finally drushing in with the finishing blow with Riptide. After the fight, I want there to be an image of a wand snapped in two in the sand, the last haunting remnant of the boy who lived. Meanwhile, if Harry wins, I want the death to be really creative. I want them to show how versatile Harry's magic is, and how much of an advantage that gives him. Then, similar to Percy's ending, I want them to show after the fight an image of Riptide just stuck in the sand, blood washing away into the sea. No matter who wins, I want them to show remorse over having to take the other's life. After all, it would be in character for them. And they are characters that mean a lot to a whole bunch of people, so killing off either one is going to be a huge deal. For the characters' analyses, I want them to bring in some feats from the actual books. Usually for these sort of shows, they'll usually try and do a lot of feats from the source material, and this would be the perfect time to finally try and quantify literary feats. In fact, they kind of have to, because the the Percy Jackson basically only has the books and those really, really god-awful movies that aren't even canon. I want them to point out how similar these stories are, just to poke fun at it, but also to bring attention to why this is such a legacy match in the first place. I want Boomstick to make fun of Percy for his whole blue food thing, and I want Harry's analysis to have a bit where Wiz just gets super angry about how nonsensical some of the more ridiculous Harry Potter spells are, and how nonsensical it is, and how the rules work. Finally, in the conclusion, I want them to bring up what these characters mean to the people that read these franchises. These characters are more than just fighters or words on a page. They are heroes, ideals, people that many, many people look up to, and I want this death battle to represent that. Alright, so that was my rant. If you're still watching this long, how? If I'm being honest. But thank you, and I might do more of these videos, I don't know. This was very easy to edit, and it was a nice break from the dub work. And I certainly enjoy talking about this stuff. You will not find me lacking in motivation to do this. So I'll see you all later.